The Man on the Hill. Delphine went missing on a Tuesday in September, and by Friday the whole parish had decided she'd run off. Can't blame her, they said, at the general store, at the church, in the kitchens where black women gathered to share news and warnings. Young girl like that, smart as a whip, what's keeping her here? Nothing but swamp and sorrow. She probably caught a train north looking for something better. But Mama Celeste knew. She knew because Delphine's money was still under the floorboard in the back room, $47.32, saved over 3 years of scrubbing floors and washing linens, enough for a train ticket and a few months of careful living when she found her feet in Chicago or Detroit or anywhere that wasn't here. She knew because the locket was still in its hiding place behind the loose brick in the chimney. The locket with her dead mother's picture, the only photograph Delphine had of the woman who died bringing her into the world. She wouldn't have left that behind for anything. And she knew because she remembered the stories her mother had told her and her mother's mother had told her. A chain of whispered warnings stretching back through generations, passed from woman to woman in the dark hours when men were asleep and truth could be spoken. Don't go up that hill. Don't work for the man in the big house. Don't let him see you. Don't let him want you. He takes one of us every so often, and they don't come back. Mama Celeste was 73 years old. She'd spent her whole life waiting for this, hoping it wouldn't come, knowing it would. She wrote a letter to her grandson in New Orleans. Marcus had come back from the war strange and silent, but he'd come back strong. He'd seen things in France that had burned away his fear. He was the only one she trusted to believe her, the only one she trusted to help her finish what her grandmother had started. Marcus Thibodeau stepped off the train in Bayou Cachette on a morning so humid the air felt like wet cloth against his skin. He hadn't been back in 4 years. The war had taken him to France, to trenches full of mud and blood and the screaming of men dying in ways that made no sense. He'd survived. Lots of men hadn't. He still didn't know why he'd been spared, or if spared was even the right word for what had happened to him. He found Mama Celeste on her porch, shelling peas into a bowl, looking exactly as she had when he'd left. Some people aged fast and hard. His grandmother aged like stone. Slow, imperceptible, her face carved by decades of sun and sorrow into something that would last forever. "You came," she said. "You asked. Sit down, boy. I got things to tell you." He sat, and she told him about Delphine, about the money and the locket, about the way the girl had been acting strange in the weeks before she'd vanished, distracted, dreamy, like something was calling to her that no one else could hear, and about the man on the hill. "He calls himself Stephen Marsh now," Mama Celeste said, "but that ain't his name. That ain't never been his name. He's had more names than you got years, child. My grandma called him Etienne Lemaire. Her grandma called him something else, and before that," she shook her head, "before that, there wasn't anybody left alive who remembered what he was called." "What are you saying? That he's, 100 years old?" "Older." Her eyes held his, steady and certain. "Much older. And every 33 years, someone disappears. Someone who won't be missed. Someone nobody will come looking for." 33 years. That's the cycle. That's how long he can wear a body before he needs a new one. Marcus stared at her. The words should have sounded insane, should have sounded like the ravings of an old woman who'd lost her grip on reality. But he'd seen things in France, things that crawled out of the dark when the shelling stopped, things that wore the faces of dead men and spoke in languages no living tongue should know. He'd learned in those trenches that the world was bigger and stranger and more terrible than anyone wanted to admit. "Tell me everything," he said. He started with the land records. The parish courthouse was a crumbling building that smelled of mold and old paper, staffed by a clerk who looked at Marcus with the particular suspicion reserved for black men who asked too many questions. But Marcus had learned patience in the war, and he'd learned how to make himself small and unthreatening when necessary. He found what he was looking for in the property records. The house on the hill, a sprawling plantation-style manor that had somehow survived the war and Reconstruction and every other catastrophe that had befallen Louisiana, had been in the same family for as long as records existed. The name changed, Lemaire, then Lamar, then Marsh, but the property never sold, just transferred, passed from father to son, generation after generation, the dates lining up with suspicious precision. 1825, Etienne Lemaire dies. Property passes to his son Jean-Baptiste. 1858, Jean-Baptiste Lemaire dies. Property passes to his nephew Esteban Lamar. 1891, Esteban Lamar dies. Property passes to his cousin Stephen Marsh. 33 years. Exactly 33 years, every time. Marcus pulled the census records next, found descriptions of the property owners across the decades, and that's when his blood went cold. 1850 census, Jean-Baptiste Lemaire, white mare, approximately 45 years of age, dark hair, thin build, prominent cheekbones. 1880 census, Esteban Lamar, white male, approximately 40 years of age, dark hair, thin build, prominent cheekbones. 1910 census, Stephen Marsh, white male, approximately 35 years of age, dark hair, thin build, prominent cheekbones. The descriptions didn't match different men. They matched the same man, seen by different census workers across 60 years, always looking roughly the same age, always with the same distinctive features. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Either this was the most elaborate hoax in Louisiana history, or Mama Celeste was right. The man on the hill had been alive for a very, very long time. That night, he went up the hill, not to confront, not yet, just to see, just to understand what he was dealing with. The road wound through live oak draped in Spanish moss, the trees so old and thick their branches formed a tunnel that blocked out the moon. Marcus had brought a lantern, but he didn't light it. The darkness felt safer, less exposed. The house emerged from the trees like something that had grown rather than been built. 3 stories of faded white columns and wraparound porches, shutters hanging askew, the whole structure listing slightly to the left, as if exhausted by the weight of its own history. But there were lights in the windows. Marcus crouched behind a magnolia tree, watching. A figure moved past one of the upper windows, tall, thin, moving with the slow deliberation of someone who had nowhere to be and all the time in the world. And then Marcus heard the whispers. They came from everywhere and nowhere. The trees, the ground, the air itself. Voices layered on voices, speaking in languages he didn't recognize, words that slithered past his ear and left cold trails on his skin. He takes and takes and takes. We are still here. We cannot leave. Help us. Help us. Help us. Marcus's hands went to the pistol at his hip, a useless gesture. What good was a gun against ghosts? But the weight of it was comforting, familiar. Movement at the edge of his vision. He turned. A woman stood among the trees, young, dark-skinned, wearing a dress that might have been fashionable 50 years ago, now faded and torn. Her eyes were empty sockets, but somehow she was still looking at him. "Turn back," she whispered. "Not ready. Not yet. He's too strong." "Who are you?" 1891. I was 1891. Before me was 1858. Before her was 1825. All the way back, all the way down." "How do I stop him?" The ghost smiled. It was the saddest expression Marcus had ever seen. "Your grandmother knows. She's been preparing. Ask her about the binding. Ask her about the moment between." She faded like smoke in the wind. Marcus looked back at the house. The figure in the window had stopped moving. It was looking directly at him. He ran. "The moment between," Mama Celeste said. "That's when he's vulnerable." They were in the kitchen, lantern light throwing shadows on the walls, the smell of chicory coffee thick in the air. Marcus's hands were still shaking. He wrapped them around his cup to hide it. "Explain." "The ritual takes time. He don't just jump from one body to the next. He has to prepare the new one, break down their will, overwrite their soul with his own. It takes weeks, sometimes months, and at the very end, when he's making the final transfer, he's split between two bodies, not fully in either one. That's when we can kill him. That's when we can bind him." She reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in red cloth. "My grandmama's grandmama brought this from Africa, passed it down through the generations, waiting for someone brave enough to use it." She unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a collection of bones, small and yellowed with age, carved with symbols Marcus didn't recognize. "The binding holds him in place, traps him in the moment between, and then," she smiled, and there was nothing warm in it, "then we burn him, both bodies, everything he is, send him screaming back to whatever hell he crawled out of." "You've been planning this?" "My whole life, child. My whole damn life." She looked at him, and her eyes were hard as iron. "But I'm too old to do it alone. I need you. I need your strength. I need your courage." "And if it doesn't work?" "Then he takes you too, adds you to his collection, and maybe my great-granddaughter's grandson gets to try again in another 66 years. Marcus was quiet for a long time. He thought about Delphine, smart, quiet Delphine, who'd had plans and dreams and $47 saved for a future she'd never see. He thought about the ghost in the woods, the empty eyes, the sad smile. He thought about the victims, stretching back through centuries, each one taken because no one would miss them. No one would look for them. No one would care enough to stop it. "When do we start?" Mama Celeste's smile was fierce. "Tomorrow night. He's close to the transfer. I can feel it. Delphine's almost gone. If we're going to save any part of her, it has to be now." Marcus spent the next day preparing. He cleaned his pistol, even though he knew it probably wouldn't matter. He'd sharpened the machete he'd bought at the hardware store, because fire wasn't enough. Mama Celeste had been clear about that. The bodies had to be destroyed, dismembered, scattered so widely that no magic could put them back together. And he prayed. Not to the Christian God, though he'd been raised in the church. He prayed to whatever might be listening, whatever might care about justice and vengeance, and the settling of very old debts. "Help me," he prayed. "Help me end this." The ghosts answered. He saw them throughout the day, flickering at the edges of his vision. A woman in colonial-era dress, her throat marked with bruises. A man in the rough clothes of a field hand, his back crisscrossed with whip scars. A child, God, a child, no more than 10 years old, wearing the rags of a slave from before the war. They watched him, they followed him, and as the sun began to set, they gathered around Mama Celeste's porch, a silent congregation of the wronged. "They're with us," Mama Celeste said. "They've been waiting for this as long as I have, longer." Marcus looked at them, at the empty eyes, and the painted faces and the wounds that would never heal. "Let's go," he said. They approached the house from the back, through the swamp, where the shadows were thickest, and the sound of their passage was swallowed by the chorus of frogs and insects. The house loomed above them, dark except for a single light in the uppermost window. Marcus could feel something emanating from it, a pressure, a wrongness, like the air before a storm. The hair on his arm stood up. "He's doing it now," Mama Celeste whispered. "The transfer. I can feel it." They climbed onto the porch. The door was unlocked. Why would he lock it? Who would dare come here? Inside, the house smelled of dust and age and something else, something sweet and rotten that Marcus recognized from the trenches. The smell of death, but death that hadn't quite finished dying. They followed the light upward. 3 flights of stairs, each one creaking under their weight, announcing their presence to anyone who might be listening. But no one came. No one stopped them. The house felt empty, abandoned, as if its owner was too occupied with other matters to notice intruders. The door at the top of the stairs was closed. Behind it, Marcus could hear chanting, words in a language that predated human speech, sounds that scraped against his sanity like fingernails on glass. He looked at Mama Celeste. She nodded. He kicked the door open. The room was a horror. Candles everywhere, arranged in patterns that made Marcus's eyes water when he tried to focus on them. Symbols painted on the floor in something dark and viscid that he didn't want to identify. The smell of rot was overwhelming, thick enough to choke on. And in the center of the room, 2 figures. One was Delphine, or what was left of her. She stood rigid, arms at her sides, eyes staring at nothing. Her mouth was open, and something was pouring out of it. A mist, a vapor, an essence that glowed faintly in the candlelight. Her soul being pulled from her body like thread from a spool. The other figure was Stephen Marsh. He was older than the census records suggested, older than any living human man should be. His skin was papery and thin, stretched over bones that seemed too prominent, too sharp. His hair was white, his eyes sunken, his body hunched with the weight of centuries. But he was smiling. "Ah," he said, "visitors. How unexpected." His voice was wrong, layered, like multiple people speaking at once, their words slightly out of sync. "I know what you are," Mama Celeste said. She stepped forward, the bundle of bones clutched in her gnarled hands. "I know what you've done, and I know how to stop you." Stephen Marsh, or whatever he truly was, tilted his head. The movement was too smooth, too reptilian. "Do you? Fascinating. Your grandmother's grandmother tried something similar, as I recall. It didn't end well for her." "I ain't her." "No, you're older, weaker." His eyes flicked to Marcus. "And you've brought a soldier. How quaint. Tell me, boy, do you think that gun will help you? I've been shot before, many times. It's somewhat unpleasant, but hardly fatal." Marcus raised the pistol anyway. "We'll see." "Arrogance of youth," Stephen Marsh sighed. "Very well, if you insist on dying." He moved, faster than any human should move, a blur of motion that crossed the room in an instant. His hand closed around Marcus's throat, lifting him off the ground with impossible strength. And Marcus had just enough time to think, this is it. This is how I die, before the ghosts intervened. They poured into the room like a flood. Countless victims, centuries of the murdered and the consumed, their transparent forms solidifying just enough to grab hold of Stephen Marsh and pull. He screamed, a sound that shattered windows and made Marcus's ears bleed, and dropped Marcus to the floor. "Now!" Mama Celeste shouted. She threw the bones. They scattered across the floor, landing in a pattern that seemed random but wasn't, and where they fell, lines of fire erupted. Not real fire, something colder, blue, a light that burned without heat, but held Stephen Marsh in place as surely as chains. He thrashed, he howled, the ghosts held him, and the binding held him, and he was trapped in the moment between, half in his old body, half reaching for Delphine's, fully in neither. "The machete!" Mama Celeste screamed. Marcus scrambled to his feet, drew the blade. Stephen Marsh's eyes met his, and for just a moment, Marcus saw something behind them. Not evil, older than evil, older than anything that had a name. A consciousness that had watched civilizations rise and fall, that had fed on humanity for longer than humanity had existed as such, that regarded Marcus as the way a man regards an insect. "You think you've won," those eyes said. "You've won nothing. The knowledge survives. It always survives. And eventually, someone will find it again." Marcus swung the machete. It took an hour to finish. The bodies had to be dismembered, burned, scattered. Mama Celeste directed him with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this 1,000 times in her mind, and Marcus obeyed without question, hacking and burning until there was nothing left but ash and fragments of bone. When it was over, he stood in the ruins of the room, covered in blood and soot, and watched as the ghosts began to fade. One by one, they dissolved into the light. The woman from 1891, the man with whip scars, the child in rags, all of them, finally free, finally released from the prison of their murderer's continued existence. And last of all, Delphine. She stood before him, more solid than the others, more present. Her eyes were whole now, warm and brown, the way he remembered them from before. "Thank you," she said. "I'm sorry we couldn't save you." "You did save me. You saved all of us." She reached out, her hand passing through his cheek like a cool breeze. "But be careful, Marcus. Be careful of what you found." And then she was gone. Mama Celeste didn't make it home. Her heart gave out on the walk back through the swamp. Marcus found her slumped against a cypress tree, a smile on her face, her eyes open and staring at the stars. They buried her in the morning in the little cemetery behind her church, next to her mother and her grandmother, and all the women who had passed down the knowledge and the waiting. And then he went back to the house on the hill. The structure was collapsing in on itself, as if whatever had held it together for centuries had finally let go. But in the wreckage, Marcus found what he was looking for. A book, bound in leather that felt wrong under his fingers, pages filled with symbols and words in languages that shouldn't exist. The knowledge that Stephen Marsh had carried with him for eons, written down, preserved, waiting. Marcus told himself he was keeping it safe, making sure no one else found it, making sure the horror couldn't start again. He took it back to Mama Celeste's house, hid it under the floorboard where Delphine's money had been, and at night, when he couldn't sleep, he read it. The words made sense to him. They shouldn't have. They were written in alphabets that predated Phoenician, concepts that predated language itself, but they slid into his mind like water into a vessel, filling spaces he hadn't known were empty. He learned things about the ritual, about the cycle, about the moment between, and how a victim's soul could be consumed to regenerate the original vessel, or, if preferred, how to abandon the old body entirely and adopt the new one. The margins were filled with notes, bodies lived in, bodies prolonged, Some vessels worked better in certain times, certain places, easier than looking the same forever. A choice, made every 33 years. That's how long a body could last, if you prepared it correctly. Marcus was 26, strong, healthy. He had plenty of time. He didn't need to think about this for years, decades. But the knowledge was there, and it whispered to him in the dark hours. You could live forever. You just have to take what you need. Someone who won't be missed. Someone no one will come looking for. He caught himself looking at people differently now, evaluating, assessing. The drifter who passed through town, the widow who lived alone on the edge of the swamp, the young man, slow in the head, who swept floors at the general store for pennies and slept in the back room. Someone who won't be missed. He tried to burn the book. The fire wouldn't catch. The pages wouldn't tear. The leather wouldn't crack no matter how hard he tried to destroy it. It was waiting for him. It had always been waiting for him. Late one night, 3 months after the confrontation on the hill, Marcus sat in Mama Celeste's kitchen with the book open in front of him. A single candle burned, casting shadows on the walls. He looked at his reflection in the dark window, and for just a moment, just a flicker, his reflection smiled when he didn't. You could live forever. Marcus Thibodeau closed his eyes, and he didn't say no.